Ready? Go!
Is it reasonable to believe a DLC should win Game of the Year? Cause I think it's safe to say that Shadow of the Erdtree has surpassed everything that's come out this year. Or at the very least, it's surpassed every DLC that's come before it. But I doubt a lot of people feel the same way that I do. Whether it be the personal preferences, or you know, the difficulty. Shadow of the Erdtree at launch was getting review bombed due to how difficult the bosses were. And it'd be understandable if there was journalists giving it negative reviews, since they're probably on like a time limit, or they're not fully familiar with Elden Ring's combat. But no, they were giving it 10 out of 10s. It was FromSoft fans that had a problem with it. The same guys that grew up with Demon's Souls on the PS3, which ran at 30 FPS on a great day. Instead of telling these guys to just get good, I want to look into the reasoning behind why they might feel this way. What is it about this DLC in particular that's so different compared to past Souls DLC? And maybe offer some tips that have helped me, and hopefully help anybody else that's been struggling. I think that Shadow of the Erdtree not only has some of the best fights in the series, but their high difficulty made me have to try out strategies that I would have never done in base game. So the high difficulty of the DLC ends up showing off the best and worst aspects of Elden Ring. And if we're gonna start this thing right, then what better place to start off than the beginning? After playing every other Soulsborne DLC, my only expectation for Shadow of the Erdtree was that the final boss was going to be the hardest boss in the game. But what concerned me was that Malenia was constantly in the conversation of hardest Souls boss, along with Orphan of Kos and Gale, and she was base game. Oh no. And I did end up getting spoiled on who the final boss was, and instead of getting upset, I instead felt fear. I ain't know much about Elden Ring's lore, but I at least knew that Malenia had to take herself out along with 1/4 of the lands between just to defeat Radahn. And even being infected with super cancer, he was still one of the toughest bosses in base game. So like the idea of having to fight the closest thing to him in his prime terrified me. Now, even though Starscourge Radahn gave me a lot of shit, I'd still say it's one of the best fights in Elden Ring. Everything to do with the Radahn festival, the fight and arena being built for summoning a bunch of guys, the whole spectacle of the encounter stuck with me to this day. And having beaten Consort Radahn, what do I think of it now? Is it my turn to attack yet? My fault. A lot of people say that Malenia is secretly a scrapped Sekiro boss that's trapped in Elden Ring. And I've also seen a lot of people say that Demon of Hatred is an Elden Ring boss stuck in Sekiro. I don't even want to know what kind of game this guy's from. Past games always had fights with legendary characters when they were at their weakest, which was the point, but I have always wondered what it'd be like to fight a character like that at their peak. So I can't really be too mad at FromSoft, I literally asked for this. The first phase is tough, but it's manageable, you know? After dying to him about 50 times, I was able to comfortably get past it. It's the second phase that made me feel less of a man. This guy is constantly throwing out unrelenting attacks and never giving you time to recover between them. When he's done with one combo, he immediately does another combo. And every time he swings a sword, he leaves a light trail behind. And not only is it the most blinding thing ever made, but if you get hit by the sword, you'll fall into the light trail, which is pretty much a guaranteed death. Most of his attacks take away half of your HP, so the only way you can safely heal after getting hit is to just keep blocking, and dodging, and dying, and dying. You ever fought Eddie Gordo on Tekken 8? It's like that, but somehow Eddie makes me more upset.
How is that even fair? You're just button mashing Flip.
But the reason why I'm talking about the fight so early into this is because this was my first real roadblock. It really got me thinking what I should be doing differently compared to what I've been doing for the rest of the bosses. Like maybe if I did something differently, I would finally beat this guy. At least I hoped so. This guy did me bad. For a few moments, I could see glimpses of me having fun with this boss. But for a majority of the time, it felt like fighting one of those god mobs in Project Dove. Like, you know, the ones that end up breaking the console? I don't know if anyone else has had a similar experience, or if I'm just weird, but I was terrified when I first started creating my character. I didn't know what kind of guy I wanted to make. I've heard about how ridiculously hard these games are, so I didn't want to screw myself by allocating my souls towards the wrong stats, or by picking a playstyle I didn't jive with. This is where the DLC comes in. because if you beat both Radahn and Mog to get here, you've pretty much solidified your build. Most of what you're gonna find in the Lands of Shadows are the usual stuff. New weapons, armor, talisman, ashes, smithing stones. Lots and lots of smithing stones. At first I was upset. Like, most of the rewards for exploration is stuff that I'm never gonna use. What's the point? I already got the perfect build. I don't need any of this stuff. That was me on June 21st, 2024 BR. Before Radahn. It wasn't until I actually gave these weapons a shot that I realized what made Elden Ring more than just Dark Souls 4. If I want to change up my build and strategy, I can just do that now. In the old games, if I was stuck on a boss, the game would just go, tough shit, get over it. There weren't much upgrade materials around to buff any weapon you want. You can't waste those things willy-nilly. And respecking was always a hassle to go through, so for your first time playing, you're gonna be sticking with one build. But with Elden Ring, with how unique every boss is, it encourages you to change up your build. You can buy most of the smithing stones, and level tiers are everywhere if you're exploring normally, so the game gives you enough legroom to at least try out some of the weapons that you find. I don't think people rave enough about how you can equip talismans that increase your stats. Okay, so I just found out that past Dark Souls games do the same thing. Just pretend that they don't. But it's more than just changing weapons. It's about how easy it is to change your entire playstyle, and how the DLC gives you the freedom to do that. And what reinforced this idea for me was the forges, the new dungeon types introduced. They're littered with smithing stones, and they don't end with a mini-boss. Instead, they end up rewarding you with a unique weapon. People who've been sticking with one build and plan on keeping that build might feel like the dungeon ended way too quickly. And you know what? They might not be wrong. But I think giving the players a cool new toy to play with instead of the same recycled mini-boss is a way better reward. FromSoft trusts that you now have the levels and experience to give you new weapon types and allowing you to try out all of the stuff you've been stockpiling during your journey. And it sucks that I only figured this out while struggling with the final boss. This made my second run through the DLC so much more enjoyable. I call this build the 8-handled Sword Divergent Sealer Divine General Maharaga build. He carries 2 of the same weapons, both with different affinities in Ashes of War. That's right, he can adapt mid-battle, it's insane. Now, are most people willing to change the entire build just to fight a boss? Probably not. But making these little tweaks to my original build was exactly what I needed to make Radahn way more tolerable. What I'm getting at is that Shadow of the Erdtree makes changing your build and playstyle 10 times easier than the base game already does, which allows for a kind of hidden difficulty slider for if somebody wants to spend 10 hours on a boss or 10 seconds. So for the people that's complaining that the DLC is too difficult, maybe those are the same people that aren't willing to change their build, that aren't willing to experiment. And like, I get it, the old games didn't allow this much freedom, but if you're spending hours on a fight and at this point you're not having any more fun, I honestly recommend trying out some of the other items you've picked up on your journey. It might be the missing piece to the puzzle you need. And if you're still struggling, then you can always try picking up some of the scatter Tree fragments are the main way of bulking up your guy, and while they are a great concept giving the players another reason to explore the world, it isn't really implemented the best. Y'all know what golden seeds are. They increase your flask charges, they're littered everywhere, and they're pretty essential to beating the game. Out of the 43 potential seeds that you can get, you only need 30 of them to max out your charges. This ensures that no matter which direction you take, you're always going to run into a handful of them. Compare this with the scatter tree fragments. If someone's having trouble with the boss, the main way to fix this is to pick up more fragments. Out of the 50 of them in the game, if you want to max out your shadow level, you will need all of them. You need every last one. Now, I thought I fully explored the Shadow Realm and I beat every Remembrance boss except Radahn, but I was still on level 14. And after spending a few hours on Radahn, I thought to myself, man, I don't want to spend all day on this guy, so I might as well get max Shadow Blessings. And at that point, I was no longer playing Elden Ring. I was now playing Banjo-Kazooie, Prepare to Die Edition. I think that players having trouble leveling up their Shadow Blessings isn't the fault on them, but it's actually the fault of the game. Like, you don't hear people complaining about not having enough Estus charges, you know? Most of them are easy to find, like the ones at the crosses or the ones inside dungeons. But if you're trying to go for all of them, like I did, some of them are way harder to find despite them being essential upgrades. The mini hippos, I get. The big one has 2, so the small ones have 1, I get that. But then you get to the shadow guys. Yeah, you know those disgusting black creatures that FromSoft put 50 of them in a room to populate an area? I had to find this out the hard way. Some of those guys carry pots, and if you kill the ones with the pots, they drop key items, including fragments. What? Keep going? Okay. There are a total of 4 of these guys in the DLC. Meanwhile, there are a total of 5 fragments you can get after beating Commander Gaius, and he's located in the back section of Shadowkeep, which is pretty well hidden. So this means that if you didn't beat Gaius, or didn't even know about the back section, and you didn't know about the Shadowpock guys, you then miss out on 3 whole levels because of them.
I don't believe that happens. Wrong. That's me. I did that last week.
A common response to having trouble with the boss is just, oh, just level up your shadow blessings, man. But no, it's more than that. If you take a look at the map where all of the shadow fragments are, you can see that there are whole areas that have little to none of them. Look, I waited 2 years for this DLC to come out, so of course I took my sweet time exploring the Land of Shadows. So while going through every region, I didn't mind that my reward is usually just a beautiful view and the experience. That was enough for me. But if people are struggling with the bosses and the main response to this is to keep exploring and finding these fragments, then some of them shouldn't be as obtuse as they are to find. Yeah, for most of them I'm gonna be running into them, but at some point I'm hunting these things like it's a treasure hunting stage in SA2. And not a good one. I don't need to worry if I missed a golden sea, because they're always located at the golden branches, which are impossible to miss. Same thing with the sacred tiers. Even though you do need all of them for max, there's only 12 of them and you always find them in these big churches. So again, you won't miss them. One of these things you find on a dead body. Like, I am not crazy! I think an easy solution for this is to just scatter more fragments on the map. They don't even have to increase max shadow blessings. They could just scatter more of these things in the emptier locations. It would make exploration feel more rewarding, and it would better prepare players for tougher challenges. Again, not lore savvy, but why is it that these random hippos get to drop 1 or 2 fragments, but the flower guy located at the base of the scatter tree doesn't have any? Like, I genuinely thought I missed something. I don't know, just something to consider.
Mongrel intruder, that tarnished, it seemeth. Yet, my purpose standeth unchanged. Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death in the embrace of Mesmer's flame.
The guy's getting his ass beat over there. If you know anything about Dark Souls, then you know about the term, prepare to die. It's probably one of the best slogans that I've heard for a game since, like, Thinking with Portals. Prepare to Die was surrounding the marketing for Dark Souls in the West, and is what helped the game gain the recognition it deserves. Like, compared to Demon Souls' popularity, Dark Souls' reputation for being an incredibly difficult game that you are expected to die a lot in is what got a lot more eyes on it. But while the term did accomplish the goal it set out to do, it ended up becoming the entire game's, the entire series' identity. It's what the entire conversation around the game became. Not about the world building, not about the atmosphere, but how impossible the game was. And yeah, if you're playing it for the first time, Dark Souls is hard. You don't know what you're doing yet. The game expects you to learn by struggling, by dying a lot. If you die in Dark Souls 2, you get an achievement called This is Dark Souls. And so that's what led to the term prepare to die being linked up with struggling. So if you end up using different methods to make the journey more comfortable for you, like maybe you don't want to spend 5 hours fighting Ornstein and Smo and you just want to summon Solaire, then to a lot of people who did that fight solo, you're not playing how the game is intended. Which also explains why the community has such a negative outlook on ways to make the game easier. The Souls community is filled with very talented people. The ones who stream challenge runs and make fan art that wouldn't look out of place in the Sistine Chapels. These guys love the games more than anybody else, and I would never talk bad about them. But who I will talk bad about is the small subsection of people who try to police how others play the game. Like, you know the guys.
Dude, all you gotta do is level up your shadow blessings, man. Oh, it's not that hard.
These guys suck and they will not survive the winter. But why do what these guys say matter? It's not like they influence anything, but they do. The reason why weapons like the Blasphemous Blade and Moonveil got the reputations that they did was because of these guys who viewed these weapons as broken and shamed anybody who used them. They are the reason why stuff like bleed builds and stagger builds are looked down upon. Even though Miyazaki himself says that he summons for fights, if you summon to beat a boss, you didn't beat the boss. And if you are struggling to beat a boss by yourself by the standards set by them, then they're usually the first ones to tell you, get good, skill issue. You actually struggled on that guy? He was actually pretty easy for me. I don't know, man. I don't think Souls games are for you. I get that this series has earned the reputation of really difficult games with Dark Souls and Sekiro and Bloodborne, and with Elden Ring giving players more tools to comfortably take on the challenges, Souls veterans will instead use the same techniques that they're used to from older games. And while that's fine, they then force these playstyles on other players under the guise of beating the game properly. You can't use stuff like summons, strong spells, good weapons, bleed builds, stagger builds, items made specifically for the boss. Otherwise, they'll see you as the biggest bitch and won't take your achievements seriously. This wouldn't be an issue, but this attitude being so loud and widespread ends up discouraging players from experimenting with the stuff the game gives them. If a build is too good on a boss, instead of feeling proud that you exploited their weakness, you'll instead ask yourself, did I accidentally cheese this guy? And that's another thing. The word cheese has warped so much over the years that it's now being used to describe exploiting a weakness. Now, cheesing means using the Flame of the Fell God spell against Rolana behind a fog door. Cheesing means summoning 2 phantoms for the ladder fight, both of them surviving, and then Radahn dying before you even see him. Is using a sleeping pot against the Godskin duo cheesing the fight? Is summoning a friend cheesing the fight? I'm asking because all this does is limit the options players are allowed to use for their wins to feel legitimate. So for this next tip, I want to replace the mentality of skill issue or get good. Instead, I want to use a new phrase, adapt or die. You either adapt or you die. As a wise man once said, we take those. Get good and skill issue has been morphed to block out any criticism given to the bosses while limiting different ways you can tackle these bosses. So instead, with adapt or die, if the boss is allowed to use everything it can to kill you, then so are you. The most used description to describe every Soulsborne boss is tough but fair. And ever since Elden Ring came out, people have been stretching that definition to fit the new batch of bosses. And while I don't believe in that term personally, I think at this point it's at least fair to say that for a good handful of bosses in base game and DLC, they have a couple of moves or mechanics that are just a tiny bit unfair. What I love about Elden Ring's bosses compared to the past games is that when you're fighting them, they don't feel fair. Like comparing the first actual bosses you fight, Margit is on a whole nother level compared to Father Gascoigne, or Vord, or Taurus Demon. That's why most sane people left, got better stuff, and then beat his ass. They adapted to his attacks. I believe that compared to the past games, Margit sets up that the bosses you're gonna fight in base game and DLC are gonna be way more aggressive than before to better accommodate for the thousands of items you're gonna pick up. And if you're accustomed to how the past games handle difficulty, Elden Ring ramps that up to 11. So I believe that it's perfectly fine to think that the game is unfair. I think that's what FromSoft is going for. The tough but fair description may have fit the past Dark Souls games, but you guys gotta remember, this isn't Dark Souls. You think Melania being able to heal back her HP with every hit is supposed to be fair? You think Mog stealing 3 of your Estus flasks unless you find a very specific item is supposed to be fair? Like, you can't claim that every fight is tough but fair on your own, but have the Godskin duo be mandatory. Putting down a method that somebody uses against a fight not only takes the fun out of the game, but it goes against what RPGs are. Like, can you imagine you just beat Pokemon Soul Silver and then somebody said you didn't beat the game right because you had a Lugia on your team? Let me put it to you this way. If you have reached the DLC, then you have probably spent $60 on Elden Ring and $40 on the DLC, which means you have spent $100 to get this far. Which means you are ethically allowed to do whatever you want to beat the DLC while still claiming you beat it. Look up a broken build. Put on every buff known to man. Summon Big Raga, the op stopper. Or you think I'm losing? Nah bitch, we losing. Point is, like I said, you have all the tools you need to succeed. If you want to switch up your build, you can do that. If you want to change your strats, you can do that. If you want to keep going at a boss for hours until you finally win, you can do that. Because no matter what you do, you're still gonna have to learn the boss's moveset. Otherwise, you're gonna die fairly quickly. So you have to spend at least a few attempts on the guy. You're still gonna have to be struggling, even if it's different from another guy's struggles. And if you're even able to access the DLC, you can win. I know you can. Even if it takes 10 tries, 100 tries, 1,000 tries, even if you spend a few hours or weeks, even if you have to take a break from the game because of how difficult it is, all you have to do is just keep going at it. The boss can kill you as many times as they want, and all you need to do is beat them once, and eventually, when you finally do, there is no feeling greater. When I finally beat Radahn and viewed Mikola's cutscene, I was just standing there, getting comfortable with the knowledge of knowing this is the end. Elden Ring is basically over now, no more new content for it. I have now beaten Elden Ring. And instead of feeling sad about it, I kinda felt glad. Part of that was just I was finally done with the fight. That shit sucked. As a swan song to the most ambitious game yet, FromSoft left us with, without a doubt, the hardest boss in the series, leaving players with a challenge to overcome every playthrough. And if there's one thing that I've learned throughout my journey playing every FromSoft game and going through the DLC, it's that I hate that these games are boiled down to just being difficult. I truly believe that Elden Ring is one of the best games that I have ever played. It's like top 3 greatest games for me. And it makes me irrationally upset that I almost never gave it a shot due to FromSoft's reputation of being the prepare to die guys. And I feel like I'm not the only one who once felt that way, being put off from these games due to them being deemed as some of the hardest games to ever exist. Even being used as a way to describe if a game is difficult or not. The Dark Souls of platformers, the Dark Souls of RPGs, the Dark Souls of Dark Souls, which is just Dark Souls 2. There is so much more to these games than just the difficulty, and constantly talking about how hard the DLC is just alienates newcomers from trying new things out, missing out on the potential of them having fun while struggling. With there being so many different ways of strengthening your guy and to approaching different challenges, it's sad that these are seen as not taking advantage of game mechanics, but not playing the game right. And while I do joke about it, the DLC did give me the resources I need to experiment. Throughout exploring the Land of Shadows, I never felt like I needed to grind, I need to have a specific weapon. I love playing the DLC from start to finish, and I don't think FromSoft is going to top that anytime soon. So if you made it this far and you have never played Elden Ring, or are hesitant to try out the DLC, or are wanting to try out any of the older Souls games like Bloodborne or Dark Souls, I won't lie to you, they will be difficult. It might take you a little bit before you finally understand how to play it, but once you overcome that wall, you will see that just beyond it are some of the most magical moments you will ever have in a game. And so you're probably thinking now, what was your favorite boss in the DLC? Well, it's actually quite interesting, and my favorite is actually...
Enough. I have endured more than enough. I ask you forgive me, dearest Anaya. To sacrifice something precious, the life of a fair maiden, that you would toss into the fiery forge, only so that you may be lord. What a horrible thing to ponder. Spare the poor girl, and singe your own flesh in her stead, and the girl can be spared.
Did you see what they did to my ancestors? The whole clan buried alive, sick, maddened, husks of themselves. If you heard their moans, they're hardly human anymore. They think we worship the 3 fingers, that we called the maddening sickness down upon them. Well, if that's what they expect from us, then that's what they shall get from us! The world of grace and its people should have been content to see us sink between the cracks, but to have intruded upon our solace, having broken us upon their whims, never forgive any of you.
If you intend to claim the frenzied flame, I ask that you cease. However ruined this world has become, however mired in torment and despair, life endures, births continue. There is beauty in that, is there not?
The depths of your foolishness!
All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again.
If you inherit the flame of frenzy, your flesh will serve as kindling, and the girl can be spared, setting you on the righteous path of lordship, the path of the Lord of Chaos. Burn the Erdtree to the ground and incinerate all that divides and distinguishes. Ah, may chaos take the world. May chaos take the world! May chaos